This is one you're going to want to stay tuned for. You know, I have the habit of counting my blessings every day and giving thanks for all the benefits that I've received in life. Some people may have thought that Katie Asher would be deprived of that, but she made an astounding discovery. And it happens to deal directly with one of her 5 children, Houston, who is autistic. This is a topic that I am so uninformed on and not aware of the main diagnoses, the breadth, the scope. I just have these vague notions that people like Elon Musk are somewhere on the spectrum, whatever that is. Katie, can you help shed some light on this? Katie, by the way, I should tell you, she is a mother of 5. She is an author, and she has her own podcast called The Podcast of Heaven. That's pretty bodacious.
It is, isn't
Broadcasting live from heaven. Here she is, ladies and gentlemen, Katie Asher.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate that. Really, our story begins with my son's severe neurological injury when he was an infant from vaccines. That's where it all started. And, before that, the book that we wrote, it's called The Book of Heaven, which is why the podcast of heaven, the Book of Heaven, that's kind of the whole theme of it. And our intention is certainly not to step in and take the place of any theological teaching. What we are trying to do is center back to the Word of God and let that be our source for everything. And all of the things that we discuss are really just going back to understanding how science and scripture are actually consistent, and why these non-speaking autistics have so much to teach us that's actually in scripture. It's not adjacent or in addition to, it's actually of scripture.
I had no idea. So where in scripture do you find it? Does it talk about autism in particular in the scripture?
Does.
Well,
It
enlighten
actually
us.
specifically does. For example, first you have to understand what is autism. I think that's where you have to
Let's
start.
start with that because that would help.
So, and instead of what the DSM-5 has done, which is basically throw every single thing every single, issue or anxiety or difference, where it becomes completely ambiguous. Severe autism was actually diagnosed and identified by Leo Kanner back in 1947, and he identified very specific traits that were observable, and these included a loss of eye contact, a loss of social interaction, anxiety, sensitivity to noises, a strange gait, very specific things, an inability to verbally access, words. Would lose speech, and an overall withdrawing from the world. That was what was originally identified. What you see now with the DSM-5 is really nothing like that for most of the actual diagnoses, except for that 26 to 30% that we would be called profound or severe. And that's what my son is. And his injury came from vaccines when he was an infant. It started with the DTP and became progressively significantly worse with the MMR. When people ask me, well, how do you know it was a vaccine injury, right? That's one of the main ones. I said, well, he was developing perfectly normally. Then he got a shot. Then he broke out in these little red spots. We end up in the hospital, and a hematologist said, your son either has leukemia or immune thrombocytopenic purpura, which I didn't know what that was.
Don't feel bad, neither do I.
She came back and said, he has immune thrombocytopenic purpura. This is a vaccine injury.
Oh my gosh.
What it is. Yeah. And of course, at the time, we didn't know what the long-term effects
Vaccine for what?
DTP.
What is DPT?
Diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus.
Was I vaccinated for DPT?
DTP, and
DPT?
maybe not.
I don't
Um,
think so.
we were not vaccinated with nearly the number of vaccines that children are vaccinated for when my son was vaccinated, or even now. So
I mean,
it's
I think I
unlikely.
had like maybe 3 vaccinations.
Yeah,
What's that
most of
one on your
us.
arm that leaves a little tattoo?
Mhm.
That one?
Yes, that was
I
the
know
smallpox.
smallpox.
Hmm.
And then I know we went to my grammar school every Sunday for 3 or maybe 4 Sundays after church to get a cube of sugar that
For
had
polio.
a vaccine on it for polio.
Yes,
I
which they've
don't think
actually
I,
found
I
was
don't think I
totally
was
ineffective.
vaccinated for much else beyond that.
Yeah. That's because our immune system is actually made to handle an incredible amount of variants, as well as, I mean, our bodies are made to heal. That's what it's designed to do. And the vaccine is, in fact, vaca, the root word comes from cow in Latin. And what they originally did was, this man had this Jenner is his name, had this fantastic idea that, gee, the cow maids don't get smallpox, so maybe the pus on the cows helps them to not get smallpox. So they took the pus from the hooves of cows and they injected it. They literally scraped off the skin and put it directly into the people's bodies, many of whom died, many of whom became tragically ill. All of this is gone through incredible detail. The whole history of medicine is detailed, I mean, in modern day medicine is detailed in Dissolving Illusions by Dr. Suzanne Humphreys. It's an incredible book. I encourage everyone to read it. It's over 700 pages. It's filled with graphs that actually prove the evidence that we have all been under an illusion that vaccines are the way to protect us. And they are not, because they actually bypass two different levels of the body's immune system, which are incredibly important in the immune process. This is why pertussis, part of that diphtheria, pertussis tetanus shot, this is why everyone's getting it now, even if you've had the vaccine, because there was actually a whole ecological system that required other people who had a natural immunity to be part of that immune process, which is what most people had. What they've learned is that almost all of the credit that vaccines have been given for, saving humanity from disease is undo them. And it's actually due to improved nutrition, improved environmental standards, improved living conditions, improved maternal health, um, improved sanitation in particular. All of these things are actually the factors that improve normal health in an individual and helping them to be able to resist any kind of attack on the body as far as an illness or any type of infirmity. So that is what we actually need to go back to, is health and wellness, and not injecting our children with neurotoxins. And that's the issue.
So, who prescribed the DPT vaccine for your son?
That would be the doctor, just a normal wellness
His
check. I went in for,
pediatrician?
hmm I went
And
in,
you said, well, who am I? The doctor says to get him the vaccine. Was it
yeah, I was
required? Did the schools require that vaccine for admission?
well, at 8 months old, he really wasn't being required to go to school. So
But eventually, would they have
yes, they
said,
would require it. And my
hmm,
son actually received the live cell, which was later changed to the DTaP. What people don't know is that the DTP is the actual shot that is responsible for the 1986 vaccine vaccine manufacturers immunity law. It was the DTP. At that time, so many children were being injured by that shot for their lives, completely neurologically destroyed from the DTP, that and there were only 3 vaccines being manufactured at the time because so many people had pulled out for childhood vaccines. There were only different vaccines being manufactured, one for each 3 different companies. Letterly Laboratories, which was eventually bought by Pfizer, was facing at that time in 1986 liability in court cases 200 times their profit.
Oh my gosh.
And Congress chose to protect the profit of vaccine manufacturers instead of children. They set up a vaccine court where they then proceeded to say that the actual injuries that are associated with these vaccines wouldn't qualify for the vaccine injury court. They specifically named autism. At the time, all of these things that were called autism, what people didn't realize, they thought they were intelligence. They thought there was a lack of intelligence because the child couldn't speak and the child wouldn't respond.
That must just have been heartbreaking. We're also very excited to welcome Nessa's Hemp as a advertiser on our show. And you know, I don't put my name behind something unless I actually believe in it. So when I tell you about Nessa's Hemp, I want you to listen up. Nessa's Hemp is a Chicago-based hemp company founded by Anessa. And what she has built is really something special. We're talking clean, high-quality hemp products with no gimmicks, just real ingredients, real transparency, and real results. Whether you're dealing with stress, sleep issues, or inflammation is the enemy, or you just want to add something natural to your wellness routine, Nessa's Hemp has something for you. And right now, in our city, head over to nessahemp.com. That's NESAS hemp.com and check out what they've got. Use the promo code John at checkout for a discount, and that's just for our listeners. Nessa's Hemp, homegrown, honest, right there in Chicago.
So in 1986, when the bill was put before Congress that Reagan signed, at the time, there were only 3 vaccine manufacturers of childhood vaccines. And each of the 3 manufacturers, each only manufactured one vaccine. Letterly Laboratories is who produced the DTP vaccine at that time. That is the same company that produced the vaccine that injured my son. Pfizer is who ended up purchasing Letterly Laboratories. At the time in 1986, whenever that law was signed into law, Letterly Laboratories was facing lawsuits in total 200 times their profit. The entire purpose of that law was not to protect children, it was to protect profit. That's what they were doing. They knew they couldn't make the vaccine safe. The reason why they can't make them safe and why they still to this day cannot make them safe is because of the actual nature of the immune system and what they use to trigger the immune system to react. What they use is neurotoxins. They use aluminum adjuvant, aluminum hydroxide. Aluminum has an atomic number of 13, which means there are 3 electrons in the valence shell. That makes it highly reactive. So what it's trying to do is fill the 8 possible spots that it has available to fill in that shell. So it starts stealing electrons. And when those cells have electrons stolen, then they steal electrons. And this causes a massive chain reaction. It's a chain reaction that they use to trigger the immune system, but it's one they can't control. The macrophages, which are mobile immune cells, can attach to these electrons and bypass the blood-brain barrier and take those straight into the brain. That triggers a cytokine storm of interleukin 6. The very first thing that interleukin 6 starts destroying is the myelin sheath on the neural motor pathways in the brain. That is the regression that parents discuss. That's what they report, is they lost skills. That's because the myelin sheath on the neural pathways was destroyed, making it impossible for those motor pathways to be executed. Then it causes encephalopathy. Well, encephalopathy is really serious this is why it's serious. The normal part of our developmental system is that whenever we come into the earth, we are souls in bodies. That's just how it is. And that we're basically, all of us have like millions and millions of sensory synapses. And that's to know where your body is in relationship to the environment and where your spirit, is in relationship to your body. And as you begin to develop, these motor pathways begin to form between the sensory and the motor system. And you have foundational motor, like being able to hold your head up and being able to lift, like keep your head straight, and then being able to lift your head up and have your tummy, on the floor and be able to stabilize yourself. And then bring your hand to your mouth. Those are the foundations of all motor. Whenever you have encephalopathy, basically the inflammation prevents those sensory synapses from pruning, and it prevents the neural motor pathways from integrating in with the sensory. So what happens as the baby begins to develop is their pruning does not happen, and then the motor integration doesn't happen. So they fail to be able to develop the ability to motor plan and execute motor, which leaves them trapped in their body. And that's, of course, why neurotoxins are horribly dangerous to, among many other reasons. But the interleukin storm of IL-6 actually keeps going, and it destroys the mechanisms in the liver and the kidney and the gut lining, which all contribute. Of course, the gut is where the actual neurotransmitters are produced. So again, the gut can't produce the neurotransmitters that the brain uses to execute the motor. And then you have the toxins leaking into the system, like ammonia and things like this. Well, the body can't detoxify. So you have basically the body is being flooded with neurotoxins, some from the actual uh, toxins itself, but also some from the body itself. And all of this contributes to the inability to integrate all the different systems together to have the volitional control over your motor. Oh, and I forgot. The other thing it does is the encephalopathy damages the 12 cranial nerves in the brain. In particular, the optic nerve and the amygdala, and are all these other nerves that are associated with the different regions of the brain and the different sensory systems. That, of course, distorts what the baby can observe and what the baby is sensing. And for example, in my son, whenever we were able to hear what he was actually experiencing, he kept talking about his blindness. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, my alternating eyes. I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, it wasn't until we went to a vision specialist that I found out that one of the injuries that had occurred that I knew nothing about was damage to his optic nerve. He saw three of everything. It moved, it all overlapped, and he would go blind, which means his vision would totally suppress and he would lose eyesight. This is from the encephalopathy, which vision has a huge impact on your vestibular system. What's that? That's where you are in space.
All right, let me see if I've got this
Okay.
straight. We're talking to Katie Asher. She is a mom and an author, and her son, Houston, who's now in his 20s, got a vaccine when he was an infant,
8 months old. Yes.
8 months old. I think that qualifies.
Mhm.
And she got that for her son because her son's pediatrician recommended it.
Correct.
The Go ahead.
When we went in for his, because of course we immediately ended up in the hospital. So when it came time for his MMR, I didn't want him to have it because of his reaction. I said, I don't believe his immune system is capable of processing this. And instead of listening to myself, I listened to my pediatrician, who said that was a fluke. There's nothing to worry about. And that's when,
So just yeah,
so that's when
that's when.
literally he started getting rashes all over his body. He lost total control, had chronic diarrhea. That's when the fecal smearing started. That's when he started screaming. That's when he started looping. That's when everything started.
At 8 months.
It started at 8 months. He lost the ability to clap. I remember that was the first thing, and to roll a ball. But whenever he got the MMR, that's when I started to see all the horrific effects on his bowels and the rashes everywhere and the screaming.
This is a very hard story to listen to.
Yes, it was harder to live.
That was my next point. I am certainly happy. That's not the right choice of words. I am voluntarily willing to hear the story,
Mm-hmm.
and I have great empathy for you.
Thank you.
I'm sitting here trying to put myself in your shoes, which I cannot. But as I listen to your story, you're a good mom. You did what the pediatrician told you to do.
Mm-hmm.
It did not work out. The doctor glossed over your son's reaction to the vaccine.
Yes.
And then the vendor, what was the name of it again?
Letterly Laboratories.
Letterly,
Yes.
which got bought out by Pfizer.
Correct.
Probably because they were about to go under. But you say that the United States Congress, those people that we vote for and instill our trust in, instead of looking for accountability, that they gave Letterly Labs a free pass and effectively made a law rendering them immune from lawsuits.
Not only that, but they set up a vaccine court, which was supposed to be the alternative to holding the vaccine manufacturers responsible for a product that they put a neurotoxin in. And then the government mandated children, infants who don't have an advanced developed neurological system, be injected with neurotoxins. But they established this vaccine court, which took away our constitutional 14th Amendment right to due process, equal rights under the law, as well as several other clauses within the Constitution. And I have yet to have any single lawyer explain to me how a Congress or a president can take away a constitutional right that's guaranteed. I don't know how.
Who was president
Reagan.
Who was president when the Reagan? Well, that's disappointing.
It is disappointing. I was very upset when I learned that. And
I would prefer to have heard that it was Clinton, Obama, or the likes. But you know, I happen to like Reagan a lot. But I don't think he was perfect. I don't, and I've been vocal about his shortcomings on the truth here recently. But not to we don't need to go down that path right now because there's so much more important things to talk about. So I don't know how, Katie Asher, you were able to sit here and engage with me as calm, collected, and logical as you were being. I'm not a violent person, but I'm telling you, if someone does something to my children or my wife, it could provoke me into violence. I don't know how you resisted the temptation to go get a chainsaw and visit Letterly Labs or make some Molotov cocktails. I mean, they effectively destroyed and took from you your child.
They didn't just take my child. They took my life as well. They also destroyed the lives of all of my other children. And they made us, and this is the part that people don't understand, is that once you have a severe diagnosis like this, that your life is utterly destroyed by every single institution we have. You are now a captive of the state. I am now a slave of the state. Which state? I live in Georgia, but I'm also a slave of the federal government. How do they do that? Because to receive any kind of support for the damage that they caused, I am now in their system. I'm denied justice that I should have by right, by law. I'm denied that due process. And instead, I am put into the system where I'm not even allowed to receive funding personally to care for my child. We can only pay other people. They do allow us to have a family member receive support or payment for the help that they give, but they have to pay taxes on that money. We have to pay a fiscal agent to monitor those funds, and we have to pay a consultant agency to come in and monitor whether or not I am doing a good job. I have to take notes that I provide. We cannot leave the
They're
state.
critiquing the job that you do.
Correct. And after the money that,
That's
yeah,
rich.
the money that my son, who's the employee, um is $39,000 before taxes, and we still have to pay three different agencies from that. So there's nothing, basically.
I'm so sorry.
I'm
It is disturbing beyond
Well, this
words.
is why when this topic of fraud comes up, that we find it so completely just absolutely, I don't even have a word for it. It's infuriating on every level.
Well, it's in your
Mhm.
face. I mean, they're not even trying to hide what they've done.
There's several components to it. It's not just cut and dry. There is no one that is okay with fraud. We, the parents who are recipients of autism services, are against fraud for multiple reasons. What we're upset about is that instead of going after the actual mechanisms by which this is happening, they are now putting parents under even more scrutiny. I have to take daily notes on the care I give for my son. I have to give notes for every single therapy session he attends. I have to provide individual support programs that outline every single activity he does. I have to account for, what does your son eat? What does your son watch? What does your son do with his time? Who is he with? Where does he go? Does this sound like I'm living in a free country? Or does it sound like the free country that I should have been a member and a citizen of took all of my rights and my child's life and my life away?
It's just so wrong. It is just so wrong.
Hannah Pauling, do you
So,
know that name? Hannah
who?
Pauling.
I don't
Okay.
recall. I don't know that name.
Hannah Pauling was a little girl who was also injured by the same vaccines as my son. It's around the same time, same age. Her father was a neuroscientist, and he worked with one of the expert witnesses for the vaccine court. This particular case was used as we're going to they did these test cases where we're going to say who gets qualified to have their case heard before the court and who doesn't. They took Hannah Pauling's case out, gave their family $20 million plus $500,000 every single year for the rest of her life, and then dismissed all the other cases, even though they were all the exact same injury from the exact same vaccines. And the reason why was because her dad knew somebody.
All right. So, this horrible thing happened to your son and to you.
Mhm.
Um, what what transpired? He's now in his 20s.
He's 29.
But you've told me off camera that um, his cognitive ability was relatively intact. Did I understand that correctly?
No, more so. And it actually goes back to why I was sharing that part about the vestibular system and the sensory pruning and the integration of neural and sensory. So what happened was I didn't know anything. I took all of my understanding from what I observed. And what I observed was someone who was severely injured, who had an inability to have a conversation, an inability to self care, who was self injurious, who flapped his hands, who put his hands over his ears, who screamed, who made horrible noises, who would run away constantly. Throwing himself into danger. He was hit by a truck. We had several near drownings. Um, the amount of vigilance that you have to be on with severe autism is 24/7 at high alert. That's emotionally and physically a type of fatigue and exhaustion that people don't even understand. And it's not PTSD, it's perpetual traumatic stress disorder. You're never able to get out of the stress. So I was making all of my observations on what I observed. He was kept in a self contained classroom at school, denied all real opportunities to learn and have an education. Because guess what? All IQ tests are motor based. That's another really interesting thing. You would be surprised by all the different industries that profit off of severe autism. For example, the cognitive assessment industry itself is over $2.4 billion, projected to be 30 billion not too long from now. The ABA industry, which is the ones who categorize autism as behavior and an intellectual disability, they are worth 6.73 billion annually, and that's a late number. That I think that's from 2023 or 24. I haven't gotten the new numbers. And then, of course, we have the vaccine manufacturers who make 54 billion a year from childhood vaccines alone without any liability whatsoever. We have a whole nother set of different industries that all profit off of the injuries done to our children. So
Okay.
I was
Well,
observing all of that, right?
yes.
And when he was 17, I was working 3 jobs. I was a single mom at this point, and I was totally and utterly exhausted. And I had had this event in my life where someone had basically encouraged me that my thoughts had the capacity to affect my circumstances. And I was extremely doubtful of this idea. But
Yeah. There's a book on that very topic called The Secret.
yes. And essentially, I was dismissive of that. But they gave me the proposition, the question, which was if what is a table or a chair before it's a table or a chair? Most people say like the raw material, like the wood or the plastic or the metal. And they said, well, actually, it was a thought. And the second question is if no one had ever had that thought or that idea, would the table or the chair exist? And I was like, well, they wouldn't. Actually, they can't create themselves. They're created things. So they have to be created. So that was the one idea I had that was really tremendous to me. And I was wrestling with that idea. And I came home from working one of my 3 glamorous jobs. And I'm totally being facetious. I was getting up at 4:30 a.m. to train people at a gym and waiting tables at a pizzeria. I mean, I was doing everything I could. And I came home and I laid down on the couch. Houston was 17 at the time. And he came and he sat down at my feet. And he was perfectly calm and still. He wasn't rocking or flapping his hands or making any of his noises. And I knew it was odd, but I was honestly too exhausted to even comment. And suddenly he reached over and he tugged at the blanket just like you would to get someone's attention. And I opened my eyes and he was looking directly into my eyes like he hadn't since he was an infant. And he spoke. And he said, Mama, I love you. And when you've waited 17 years to hear your child say your name and tell you I love you, you pay attention. And I did. And that was my permission to myself to believe in a miracle. The miracle came 4.5 years later when I learned about spelling. And for those who don't know what it is, it's basically you coach their motor because that's what the injury caused was a injury to their motor systems, which are multiple systems that have to coordinate together. But you coach their motor to begin to point to letters. And as they're pointing to letters, they're spelling out words and they're telling you what they want to communicate, as opposed to the myelinated motor of the things they've repeated over and over. The first words my son ever communicated that were his own were an answer to the question, if you could put any slogan on a t-shirt, what would it be? And my son spelled, I'm in here. He was 21 years old, and that was his first independent words to me.
Wow.
Right.
So so back to my earlier question, do I hear you correctly that his brain was intact, that he could see, hear, process but he was unable because of the lack of motor skills to verbalize his thoughts
His
or to
spirit,
communicate
his spirit and his intellect were completely intact. His motor system was extraordinarily um,
deficient.
deficient, not just deficient, but also injured. And
Yes.
here's the next part explains it in a little bit more depth. And the reason why this is so critical is we make observations based on what we observe. And we make the assumption that the person that we're observing is having the same sensory experience that we are, right? Like if you see something, you assume that the person next to you sees the same thing, right? And they're reacting to the
Hmm.
same thing. Even if their reaction's different, you still think that they're observing the same thing you're observing. This is where it gets interesting. So, fast forward, I'm doing all these lessons with him, trying to get to know my son because I'm desperate to know my son after 21 years. And I ran out of lessons. We were doing so many like lessons, I just ran out. And so I was using anything, and it was around the 4th of July. And so I start using uh, the Declaration of Independence. And I said, do you know what the famous phrase from the Declaration of Independence is? And he spells it out. And I was like, yes, that's right. Wow. Like, how much do you know anymore? And he starts spelling out the Declaration of Independence. And I'm like, where is this coming from? And he starts just literally, like, the amount of information coming out of him is not just like repeating back information, it's cognitive depth of understanding of principles and ideas. For example, he explained that Locke and Voltaire and what they understood about, the source of power, and that it comes from God, and that this is actually where people's rights come from, is from their being made in the image of God, and that they have inalienable rights, and that those are attached to their nature, not their
Well,
ability.
where would Houston have acquired that knowledge?
Yes, where does that come from, right? We think that everything we know comes from being taught
From a book
from a book or something, right?
or YouTube in this
And of course,
case.
I'm not saying he wasn't on YouTube. He was on YouTube a lot. And he certainly was on, the internet and everything else. He absolutely was. But it was, what I'm pointing out is that what was inside this chaotic body, this motor system, was a fully intact human being who didn't have the ability to process their motor. And their motor system was overwhelmed because their sensory was overwhelmed. And this is where we have to change and shift our understanding of autism. So one day I asked him, how do you know so much? I mean, really, like, where is this all
Mm.
coming from? And
He could be a good interviewer, or you could
and I
actually.
said to him, I said, do you just have like really good hearing? And he spells, I'm special. And I'm like, as a mom, right? Of course you are, right? And he's like, you don't get it. And he said, I can hear thoughts. And I was like,
Oh my
I
God.
was like, are you lying? That was not very encouraging as a mother, I have to tell you. I'm not my proudest moment. He said, you don't get the kind of gifts I have if you lie. So I start testing him. I test him over and over again. I test him with just things that were going on around our house, if he knew what was going on. I had my daughter text me something. He spelled it out perfectly. I had my son's friend come into the room, and I said, just sit right there, have a thought in your head. Houston, what is his thought? And he spelled out the young man's thought. And I said, was that what you were thinking? And he said, yes, pretty much exactly. Then I asked about my son, one of my other sons, and he spelled dead men don't talk. And I said, is that what you were thinking? And he said, no, he's saying he's not going to tell secrets. And I'm like, oh, this is so much bigger than I'm even realizing. Well, that night when I went to bed, I suddenly realized, oh my word, all those years ago, what they had told me was true, is that thoughts are things. What that means is that thoughts are energy. What E equals MC squared means is that energy and matter are the same thing, just manifested in different ways. That means that thoughts obey the laws of energy. And the very first one is the law of conservation, which says that it cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred. Our thoughts become things. So that was the
Wow,
beginning.
this is some heavy stuff, girlfriend. So let me ask you: did Houston's yelling and acting out and abnormal behaviors continue after he was able to spell?
They did, but he was able to explain to me what was happening. So what
That's what I
Yes,
wanted
so
to
he
know.
was able to explain what was happening. So then I was able to do things to help his body and to help him heal. For example, he started talking about my senses are illuminated. So when his body would just lose total control, what was happening is he was processing way too much sensory, which causes the body, it's too much it's more than the body can process. So the body just becomes completely out of control. The other part is without the vestibular system, the proprioceptive system won't work. So a lot of kids are called lazy or aggressive, but that's actually the amount of force you're using. So if you don't demonstrate enough force, they call you lazy. That's actually proprioceptive. If you exhibit too much force, that's called aggression. That's also proprioceptive. But if you have no awareness of where you are in space or how much force you're using, then you can't possibly be held responsible for something that's out of your control or even your perception. The other part of this, what that means is, so your vestibular system is connect, it's your body's GPS. And the way the vestibular system works is you take in visual information and auditory information. Houston is seeing triple of everything. It's all moving. He's sometimes going blind and he has synesthesia. Synesthesia is and that's because the sensory synapses didn't prune. Okay. But it's basically when the body processes input through multiple sensory channels. For example, he hears what he sees, he tastes what he sees the energy on everything because everything is actual energy. So he's processing far more information than the rest of us are. That ability also gives him, because he's very loosely connected to his physical body, he's connected to what we all are, which is our everything comes from spirit. That's the whole point of the everything is an idea or a thought before it's a thing. That's the true with us too. Everything is a thought before it's an actual thing. And so his his connection is far more attached to that spiritual metaphysical connection than it is to the material connection. And we think that like everything in the material world is really all there is, but actually nothing in the material world can exist apart from spirit.
So I'm just thinking, and I'm a little reluctant to say something for fear of being insensitive or saying the wrong thing.
It's okay.
But
I'm very gracious about things that aren't,
you seem
understood.
so. But it almost, I'm just, trying to intellectualize what I've heard
Mhm.
and draw conclusions from it. It almost sounds to me that you're describing Houston as having been trapped in his own body
Yes.
and unable to communicate his thoughts, needs, desires, questions. Um, and I'm also thinking if that were the case, that could make, if I were him, that could make me very frustrated and may cause me to act aggressively or inappropriately
There is
as a means of trying to express myself. Is that
That is absolutely
remotely?
part of it. That is absolutely part of it. But it is also a lot of comorbidities that are existing in the physical body that are causing what they would call behaviors. For example, if you look up what is toxic levels of ammonia cause in the body, and you'll basically look at a list of symptoms of autism. A lot of these, the inability to process your motor, of course, that would lead to an emotional trigger. And what happens, right? Or if you're experiencing all these thoughts that are negative around you and all these, oh, and guess what else is energy? Emotion. And you can feel everybody's emotion. And that's actually what the word means is energy, in motion, emotion. So you're getting all of this energy coming at you. It's too much. It's very depressing. It's very debilitating. and demoralizing and discouraging, what does that do to you emotionally? Well, it triggers your amygdala. And that, of course, triggers all of these other things like the limbic system and all these other different processes in the brain, which cut off access to the frontal lobe and basically put you in a state of fight, freeze, or flight, which is exactly what they do.
Wow. You seem like you have acquired an encyclopedia of knowledge
I
surrounding
have.
autism.
It's
Not
great.
only the biology, but the physical, the physiological,
And the
the,
quantum physics, don't forget that.
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, how did you gain all this knowledge? Where did you go to find it?
Well, I knew, first of all, Houston was the source of him telling me things and then me trying to go and understand what he just told me. For
Wow.
example, he told me, explained how he felt like he was falling out of his feet. So then I was trying to figure out about the magnetic fields. I was trying to figure out, the neuropathy in the body and in the different nerve cells. What is the density of the nerve cells, in those who've been injured neurologically, like all these different capacities, and then how these different systems work. But the biggest part is understanding their abilities, and that a lot of times they're reacting to something that they're experiencing in the metaphysical world as opposed to the material world. And there's all kinds of examples of that, but a lot of it is hopeful and some of it is a terrifying reality that there's a spiritual war going on all around us.
Mm,
And what we have to recognize
mm,
is that like when Houston started describing scriptures, not as somebody who was who had memorized a scripture, but as someone who had witnessed something, that was really revealing to me. But people ask, when did you first realize? And I would say, so there was this one morning where I was running late for work, and I said real quick, and my daughter was rushing in, she was running late, so of course I was running late. And I said, do you have anything to say to me before you go? And he spelled out, all the angels do is talk about you. And I literally said to him, I don't have time for this. And I put the spelling board down and ran out the house. And within between 90 seconds and 3 minutes, I was struck head on and hit a second time. And then my car flipped 1.5 times. And I was literally my hand on the asphalt and my head like lying on the asphalt, like with the bar of the car underneath me. And, I end up in the hospital. My daughter's contacted. She's of course completely freaking out because everything would be on her, and she knows that. So she's in the hospital with Houston, and he's just like calm as could be, absolutely no worries, like he could go have a beer, like he was that chill. And she goes, aren't you worried? And he spells out, calm down, she's fine. And she suddenly realized, she goes, you knew. And he said, don't be mad. It had to happen for God's wonderful plan to work. So when I get home and she tells me all of this, I'm like, okay, I need to know, like, how much do you know? How much? And he's at first kind of reluctant, like, how much do I share with you? I don't know if you can handle everything I have to say. And when he first begins, I felt like I was almost in a test, right? And he said, well, one of the main things in heaven is the making of new chances to give us. And I was like, "O- okay. And I suddenly realized his mercies are new every morning. Right. And then it was like that over and over again when he would start describing something from heaven. And then I start realizing, oh my goodness, he's describing what scriptures talk about. This was There's so many examples, but it's not even just the scriptures themselves. Although one time he was really upset, and I could tell he was depressed. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I had a vision." And I said, "Well, shouldn't that make you really happy?" And he said, Many times I have a good vision, but sometimes I have a frightening one." And so I said, "Well, what was frightening?" And he described the two roads diverged. He literally described it. And I went, you actually saw? I think it was Matthew 7. I said, you actually saw that? And he said, maddening. You're wonderful to try to stop it. And I was angry because I'm like, I'm not stopping anything. I'm mad at God. You know, like, I mean, I'm throwing my own little temper tantrum here. And he kept pushing and pushing at my heart to change my hurt and my doubt. He told me, he said, all your thoughts are rotten. And I was, of course, really upset about that because
That's kind of cold.
I agree. And you have to understand, I've been through hell, like severe trauma.
I feel you.
So I wasn't really a positive, gee, everything's going to be okay and upright and wonderful and yay. I was what's going to fall next? You know, that was my perspective. What bad thing is going to happen next? And he told me, he said, when I said that, he said, I was talking about your doubt. He said, your doubt literally destroys the very things you're praying for. And, you know, in the beginning, you were asking me, um, you know, I said, we're really just trying to get people to go back to what scripture says. And you said, is autism in the Bible? And I said, it is. And I said, well, first you have to understand what autism is. And Luke 14, when it talks about the great banquet, you know, the master sends out his servants into the street or into, you know, to get all the important people to come. And everybody's got something more important to do, but they're all doing their own will, right? Everybody's doing their own business, their own will. They're not worried about God and doing his will. And so the master gets angry and he sends a servant and he says, bring in, and this is the New King James Version, the blind, the maimed, and the lame, and then the poor, and it goes on and stuff. Literally, severe autism destroys their optic nerves. It destroys their motor planning, which completely destroys their ability to move, which is being maimed. And of course, that affects their gait, which they have all kinds of strange gaits. It's literally all three of those, but that's who he brings in, and that's who he shares the kingdom of God with. That's who he lets them see behind the veil. And then you have in 1 Corinthians 1, where it says, for God has chosen the foolish to shame the wise and the weak to shame the strong so that he will be glorified. And then in Amos, or is it Acts and Joel, I think, where it says in the last days, he has sent his spirit out and he has made old men dream dreams and young men see visions. And he has done this right in his scripture for all of us to see, but none of us believed it. And another example is in Mark 9, where the father brings his son who throws him, he's a mute, and he throws himself into fire and water to kill himself, right? That literally describes what severe autism is like. And the father said, your disciples couldn't heal him. If you can, will you have compassion and help us? And Jesus's reply was quite indignant. And he said, if I can, all things are possible for the one who believes. And the father impassionately said, I do believe, help my unbelief. What he needed was help to believe something beyond what he observed, to be able to take his mindset and have it so firmly gripped in who Christ is and what Christ accomplished for us and all of his promises, that he was not concerned about what he observed, the disaster of his son's, you know, motor system and the destruction that came with it, but he was fully confident on what Christ was going to do. That is the promise of God. That is what Christ accomplished on the cross. That is what is possible for all of us.
That's a very powerful message. That's some really powerful stuff. I should end there, but I've got a couple of questions I want to ask on the way out here. Just as I was sitting listening to your story and listening about Houston, I just, myself included, we talk more than we listen. Um, Even though the adage is God gave us two ears and only one mouth. I just wonder if part of Houston's specialty, that what makes him special, is that he doesn't really have the ability to talk. He can only listen, and
He
now
said he
he's
said
learned to
that
communicate.
no one is as good as hearing God's voice as he is. And he also said that he spent his entire life observing. Yes.
Exactly.
These young people have spent their they know they are completely normal human beings. They just have severely damaged neurological motor systems and the capacity to perceive more energy than those of us who are neurotypical who have gone through the full pruning sensory process.
So, how do you measure autism? They talk about someone's on the spectrum.
Mm.
Is the spectrum a numerical value, or
Well,
is
I
it?
think I've heard different responses to that, and I want to be very sensitive to anyone who faces any anxiety or injury of any kind, and I don't want to be dismissive to anyone's pain. So I'm very careful about how I categorize this. I don't think that a lot of these um, sensitivities should have been grouped together in the first place. I think Leo Kanner's original diagnosis should stand as it did for all of those years, and it should be by itself. Back then, there were when in the early, I guess, 80s, 90s, you started getting some developments in the DSM, and you had autism, and then you had pervasive developmental disorder, and then you had Asperger's. These were three
Mm.
separate designations, and they should have stayed that way. And I think that for anyone who has, who's taking, a lot of people are taking in more sensory, but they can't explain the metaphysical. So they're seen as too sensitive or too emotional or not in self control, or they're given all these labels by psychologists. And those are inappropriate because it's again the person on the outside making a designation of behavior, and behavior is all motor. Behavior implies intent, but if you don't have control or you're experiencing more sensory input than someone else, then it is inappropriate to be labeling that as a behavior. So, the way the system works is you take in sensory information, you process the sensory information, you execute a motor plan, and then the motor plan is, or you choreograph a motor plan, then you execute it, pick up more sensory. And this is going on at like a rate that we can't even fathom all the time.
So I
But it,
still I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt.
oh, you're right.
Finish
I'm
your thought.
sorry. I got off on a little bit of tangent. I'm
No, it's
sorry.
okay. So if I've heard you say several times that Houston uh, is severely autistic.
Yes.
Can we
What does that
quantify it?
mean?
Is it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 to 100? I mean, does it defy quantifying, or just
I
because
don't like the scale because I think we're all talking about different things. One person could be sensory averse and somebody else could be sensory seeking. Those could both be at a high level, and they would might both be a 10, even though what they're actually experiencing is totally different. We need a different way to quantify what they're experiencing. But
well,
ultimately, if someone doesn't have the capacity to motor plan in a way that they can meaningfully communicate the depths of their heart, mind, and spirit, then I think that we have a case of severe or profound autism.
okay. So I'm just, you know, trying to take this and overlay it with my layman impressions and
I think
probably
that the way
a
to
lot of
do it,
misimpressions.
I
But
think that the way to do it is to have an understanding of that the person, the human being, um, is a tri being. You have a mind, a body, and a spirit. All of these are interconnected. And what you're experiencing in the material world, as well as the emotional world, as well as the intellectual world, is all mixed together. And so it's extremely difficult to quantify all of these things. But for someone who does not have the ability to self-care, self-regulate, plan their motor, and communicate effectively with speech or writing or sign language, and they have to have the support of an outside person to be able to communicate, then this would be considered a profound motor disability. I like to categorize it as a sensory motor condition of varying levels.
All right. So you look at someone like Elon Musk, who we referred to earlier. I mean, there's a sense in our general consensus, I think, that we often refer to people with autism as gifted. And you've certainly described Houston as very gifted in many
He's
ways.
extremely gifted. They themselves will describe autism as a gift because they're able to perceive so much more than the rest of us. Their conceptual understanding is far greater. Their ability to see patterns, their ability to see the interconnectedness between everything around us is so vastly superior to a neurotypical's. Um, but they say that the inability to control the motor is the deficit.
Mm.
Elon Musk
So
does not have an inability to effectively motor plan. He's
no,
quite capable of that. So that's why
he
I don't
seems like a
consider it the
very
same.
effective communicator,
Me too.
actually.
Yeah.
Um, in 2026, the age of it's more than AI, really. It's the world of the computer chip. Is there hope that perhaps technology could be a contributor towards enabling Houston to be able to communicate his thoughts effectively?
Well, he does communicate quite effectively by pointing to letters to spell out what he wants to say. As far as using a chip or something like that, he's not exactly a fan of an alien artifact being placed in his brain to extract his thoughts. He's not a fan of that. It's something that he and one of his coaches have discussed and had some interesting conversations about. Um, his focus is not on an adaptation or a tool, but on focusing on the promises of God for healing. He wants to heal. That's where his focus is.
What a conversation. I've done, I don't know, 450, maybe close to 500 interviews. This interview, legitimately, is one of the more eye-opening, and I don't. I'm struggling to come up with the adjectives. I'm just bowled over. I'm literally bowled over. I've had a very distant awareness of autism. I think that being the judgmental sort of people that we tend to be, that I probably have just, it's been easier to put it out of my consciousness than learn and focus about it. But your story is beyond fascinating. And I just really appreciate your coming on The Truth today and sharing it with us. You've authored a book. It is called The Book of Heaven. That seems kind of presumptuous to me.
Doesn't it?
But, but you wrote it. Maybe, but you co-authored it with Houston.
I did. And
So maybe it was his insights that led to the Book of Heaven.
he wanted to write a book about God's love. And I said, okay, great. We'll write a book about autism and how it's been misunderstood and all about spelling and all these things I learned about the neurological system. And he said, if I can't write a book about God's love, I refuse to write. And I was like, well, I'm not going to put us at risk and reveal all this other crazy stuff, and everybody's going to think we're nuts. So I'm not going to do that. So we were at an impasse. And so basically, Houston demonstrated his incredible faith, and exactly what he wanted happened. I lost my job, I lost everything. And he spells out to me literally minutes after I've been fired and spells out, now the good can begin.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm
Oh my
like
God.
staring because I'm like, I need a job. And he's like, and everyone, and then literally, not, I'm not kidding you, within, I think it was just a couple of weeks, the whole world shut down for COVID. And so there I was trapped in my house and I wrote the book. And it was just this outpouring of everything that we experienced and everything I learned. And the reason it's called the Book of Heaven is not just because of the incredible hope and the promises of God that are revealed from scripture in our lives, but because heaven is going on in us and around us and everywhere. Like the last thing that Houston says in his part of the book is, I think, extremely extraordinary. But he says, malevolence and love fight for us. That's what's going on inside us and around us. He gave me a task to tell of what I've seen and to tell of his love, to be his herald. I'm without any doubt friends with Jesus. I don't want anyone to die not being his friend. Most importantly, hear this: anything is possible if you believe.
I'm going to end on that note. That is very prophetic. And I've got chills literally going down my back and arms. Thank you so much. And please convey to Houston how much we appreciate him and value him and look forward to learning more and following him. I mean, he almost sounds like a prophet. So you're very kind to take your time to come on to The Truth today. And where do people get the book?
It's on Amazon, and of course, it's also on audiobooks. You can get it on ACX or on Audible. And if you don't use Amazon, you're more than welcome to email me and I can get you a signed copy. But you'd have to pay for shipping because I'm not Amazon. And so that's asher.house.hope, asher.house.hope@gmail.com. Sorry about that.
All right. So let's say it one more time so our audience gets it.
asher.house.hope@gmail.com. And the tag Asher House Hope is on Instagram and TikTok. On X, I'm more political because I'm fighting against, corrupt politicians and vaccine manufacturers and all the other institutions. So I'm a little bit more political on that one. And that's K, capital T, Asher 5. And our website is asher.house, which is really more of a resource for families. And I need to update that and put even more resources on there. But it's a resource for families who have a severely injured child like Houston. And I also want to emphasize that those individuals who have a genetic issue like that inhibits their motor, spelling works for them as well. And I don't want anyone to limit and not presume competence because of a genetic condition. All that genetic condition does is inhibit physiological processes. It does not inhibit intellect. We think it does because that's all they can get out. But that is all a function of motor.
Well, I think you've definitely opened our eyes to those very things. Thank you again. And we will continue to follow your story. And Godspeed and our best to you in Houston. Katie Asher, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
That's The Truth. We'll be back right after this.